A sharp, high-pitched tone pierced the silence of the small cabin. The old man snapped awake, his heart pounding as the sound drilled into his ears. He hadn't heard that signal in decades. He shouldn't be hearing it now. The transmission flickered weakly on the rusted screen, its frequency scrambled and distorted, yet familiar. His wrinkled fingers trembled as he reached for the controls. He hesitated. No one had contacted him in years. No one even knew he was alive. The world had long forgotten him, and that was exactly how it was supposed to be. His past had been buried, sealed away in the darkest corners of his mind. But now, someone was digging it up. Static crackled. Then, a voice, calm, steady, and unervingly familiar. "You were never meant to be here." The words hit him like a thunderclap. His breath caught in his throat. A deep, unsettling sensation crawled under his skin, a feeling of something long lost trying to claw its way back to the surface. For the briefest moment, he felt weightless, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The message wasn't just a warning. It was personal. He squeezed his eyes shut as flashes of something buried, surfaced in his mind. A shadowed battlefield. Screams. A face he couldn't place, but one that filled him with an unexplainable dread. Running, fighting, bleeding. And then, nothing. Like someone had sliced through his memories with a knife, leaving only fragments behind. His pulse thumped in his ears. The voice on the transmission sounded familiar, but he couldn't remember why. The old holoprojector in the corner of the room flickered to life, casting an eerie blue glow across the walls. He hadn't activated it. His breath quickened. The machine buzzed and whirred, scanning distorted data before stabilizing into an image. The air left his lungs. It was him. A younger version of himself stared back at him from the projection. The face was sharper, the eyes filled with something the old man had long lost: purpose. Strength. But there was something else in that gaze. Something unnerving. It wasn't just an image. It was watching him. His younger self didn't speak. He only stood there, staring, waiting, as if he knew exactly what was coming. Then, suddenly, the screen glitched, and the transmission repeated, "You were never meant to be here." His stomach tightened. This wasn't just a message. This was a warning. A warning from someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. The flickering screen changed again, and a new set of numbers appeared. Coordinates. His breath hitched. He knew those coordinates. He had locked them away a long time ago, forced himself to forget them. And yet, here they were, as if the universe itself was pulling him back toward them. He took a step back, his hands shaking. No. He had left that life behind. Hadn't he? A sharp headache pulsed behind his eyes. More flashes, memories he shouldn't have. He saw glimpses of a war that wasn't in any history books. Battles fought in the dark, in places that didn't exist on any star maps. His hands gripping weapons he didn't remember learning to use. His heart racing, adrenaline flooding his veins as he ran through corridors of a place long forgotten. And then, nothing. A gap. A void where the memories should be. He stumbled toward the bed, his fingers fumbling beneath it. He didn't know what he was looking for, but something inside him did. His hand brushed against something metallic. Cold. Smooth. He pulled it out, dust floating in the dim cabin light. A small box. Old, yet untouched by time. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside lay a key. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, yet something deep inside told him he had once held it before. It gleamed with an unnatural sheen, too perfect, too precise. Alongside it was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, fragile from years of abandonment. He hesitated before unfolding it. Only 2 words were written inside. Come home. His chest tightened. He had a home. Or at least, he thought he did. But now he wasn't so sure. The transmission played again. You were never meant to be here. The air in the room seemed heavier now, pressing down on him like an invisible weight. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Everything in his mind screamed at him to ignore it, to let it go, to stay in the life he had built for himself here, away from it all. But he couldn't. Something was waiting for him out there. Something he had tried to forget. The screen glitched once more. A new message appeared. If you don't leave now, it will be too late. His stomach clenched. His muscles tensed. The shadows of his past had come for him. And this time, they weren't going to let him go. He clenched the key in his fist, his knuckles white. The decision had already been made the moment he saw the message. He couldn't ignore it. He couldn't escape it. His past had finally caught up to him. And now, there was no turning back. The old man sat frozen, gripping the key so tightly his fingers ached. The words on the screen burned into his mind. If you don't leave now, it will be too late. Too late for what? His breath came in short, uneven gasps. His body knew something his mind refused to remember. The key, the coordinates, the transmission, none of it was random. Someone had sent this message directly to him. Someone who knew exactly where to find him after all these years. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Whoever they were, they weren't giving him a choice. The flickering holoprojector cast an eerie blue glow across the walls, the image of his younger self frozen on the screen. The longer he stared, the more he felt like the image was watching him back. His younger self's eyes, sharp and knowing, seemed almost disappointed. Like he had expected this hesitation. The screen glitched again, static hissing through the small room. Another set of numbers replaced the image. A countdown. 2 hours. The old man shot to his feet, knocking over the chair behind him. His heart slammed against his ribs. What happened in 2 hours? He stumbled toward the console, trying to override the system, trying to trace the signal. His fingers moved with practiced ease, muscle memory guiding him through commands he didn't remember learning. But the system fought back, rejecting every attempt to access the source. Whoever had sent this didn't want to be found. He swallowed hard, staring at the countdown. 1 hour, 59 minutes. He had spent 40 years in this place, believing he was free. But now, the walls of his world were closing in, suffocating him. And the worst part? Somewhere, deep in his bones, he had always known this day would come. His eyes flicked to the old metal trunk in the corner of the room. He had ignored it for years, pretending it didn't exist. But his hands moved toward it before his mind could argue. Dust billowed as he wrenched it open. Inside lay a suit. Black, sleek, reinforced in ways he couldn't understand. He ran his fingers over the fabric. It felt like an old friend. Something cold and metallic gleamed beneath it. A weapon. His breath hitched as he picked it up. The weight. The grip. The way his fingers fit perfectly around it. This was his. Not just any weapon, his weapon. He had used it before. He had needed it before. The memories lurked beneath the surface, taunting him, just out of reach. He checked the energy core out of instinct. Fully charged. He had never touched this trunk. Never prepared for this moment. And yet, everything was ready. Like some part of him had always known he wouldn't stay hidden forever. His reflection stared back at him from the dark metal of the weapon. A face lined with age, but beneath it, something else. The man he used to be, buried beneath time and solitude. He turned back to the countdown. 1 hour, 47 minutes. The transmission had been clear. "If you don't leave now, it will be too late." The old man took a deep breath. Then, for the first time in decades, he moved like the soldier he had once been. He strapped the weapon to his belt, pulled on the suit, and left the past behind. Or so he thought. As he stepped out into the endless desert, the sky above him shifted. The air grew thick. And for the first time in 40 years, he wasn't alone. The wind howled across the barren landscape, but something about it felt wrong. Off. The sky above him, usually a dull shade of rust orange, seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. A static charge prickled against his skin. His instincts flared, an old, forgotten part of him waking up. Someone was watching. He scanned the horizon, his muscles tightening, his grip firm around the weapon at his side. Nothing moved. Not yet. But the silence was too perfect. His cabin stood isolated in the wasteland, the only sign of life for miles. He had chosen this place for a reason, because no one should have been able to find him. But something had. His eyes locked onto a shadow near the ridge. Too far to make out details. But it was there. And it was moving. He inhaled sharply, stepping away from the cabin. A choice was in front of him: go back inside and pretend he had never received the transmission, or follow the coordinates and find out the truth. He already knew the answer. His fingers curled around the key in his pocket. The weight of it felt heavier now, like it carried something more than just metal. A memory. A responsibility. A fate he had tried to escape. The shadow moved closer. And then, a voice. Low. Mechanical. Familiar. "You waited too long." The old man spun, his weapon raised, breath caught in his throat. No one was there. Just empty space. His pulse thundered. The wind kicked up dust, swirling it into strange patterns before dying down just as quickly. He exhaled, steadying himself. If something was out there, it wanted him to know it. Good. He wasn't running anymore. He turned toward the coordinates, pulling a small, rusted hoverbike from behind the cabin. It had been sitting there for years, untouched, but when he climbed on, his hands knew exactly what to do. His fingers flicked switches, adjusting fuel intake, priming the core. It hummed to life beneath him. And just like that, he was moving. The wasteland blurred around him as he raced toward the unknown, the countdown ticking in his mind. 1 hour, 29 minutes. Dust rose in his wake, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Behind him, the shadow near the ridge moved again. Faster. Following. The old man gritted his teeth and pushed the throttle forward. Whatever was coming, he wasn't ready. But he'd face it anyway. The hoverbike hummed beneath him, slicing through the desolate wasteland like a phantom in the night. The old man leaned forward, gripping the handles as the wind tore past him. The dust-covered landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, the rust-colored sky hanging heavy overhead. But something was wrong. A feeling. An instinct. He wasn't alone. The countdown burned in his mind. 1 hour, 28 minutes. The message had been clear. He had waited too long. But for what? What was coming? The weight of the weapon at his side was both comforting and terrifying. His body remembered its purpose even if his mind didn't. His fingers flexed over the throttle, his pulse thrumming in his ears. He had spent 4 decades in hiding, but the way his body reacted now, fluid, automatic, ready, told him he had never really stopped being whatever he once was. A glint in the distance caught his eye. His stomach twisted. Something, no, someone, was following him. Not just one. He counted 3. They moved in perfect formation, kicking up trails of dust behind them. Silent. Unwavering. Gaining on him. He exhaled slowly, his mind shifting into a state he didn't understand but welcomed. Assessment. Unknown hostiles. Unidentified technology. No insignias. No signals. Tactical options: evade, engage, or lead them into unknown terrain. Decision: keep moving. For now. The speed of the hoverbike increased as he adjusted the controls. The thrusters whined in protest, but they obeyed. The three pursuers didn't falter. They adapted to his movements as if they were anticipating his every action. Trained. Not just scavengers. Not ordinary men. He gritted his teeth. This wasn't random. They weren't just tracking him. They were escorting him. His heart pounded. The coordinates. Was he being led toward them, or away? The thought unsettled him. He had no memory of who he used to be, but these men, whoever they were, they knew. His grip on the throttle tightened. If they wanted him alive, that meant one thing. He still had something they needed. The terrain began to change, shifting from endless dunes to jagged rock formations. The path narrowed. Perfect for an ambush. His gut twisted. They were steering him. He glanced at the countdown. 58 minutes. Then, a shadow moved across the sky. His blood ran cold. It was too fast to be a cloud. A ship. His breath caught in his throat. Not a standard patrol vessel. Sleek. Silent. Designed for war. His fingers instinctively reached for his weapon. No. He couldn't fire. Not yet. The ship wasn't attacking. It was waiting. His pursuers didn't look up. They weren't concerned. Because they already knew it was there. He clenched his jaw. This was coordinated. This was planned. This was a trap. And he had walked right into it. The realization sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through him. He needed to move. Now. He yanked the bike hard to the left, veering off the guided path, pushing it to its limits. A second passed. Then another. And then, the ship reacted. A deafening boom shook the air as the ground behind him erupted into a firestorm of destruction. Rock and debris exploded into the sky, the force of it nearly throwing him off his bike. His ears rang. His vision blurred. They had waited until he was out of the canyon. They didn't want him dead. They wanted him alive, but nowhere to run. The explosion wasn't meant to kill him. It was meant to box him in. His stomach twisted. Who were they? What did they want? The ship's engines roared overhead, circling like a predator stalking its wounded prey. Then, another sound. A voice. Faint. Mechanical. Filtering through his helmet's ancient comm system, a frequency he didn't remember tuning into. Welcome back, Commander. His blood turned to ice. Commander? No. That wasn't his name. That wasn't who he was. The comms crackled again. We knew you would come back eventually. His breath hitched. No. He hadn't come back. He had been summoned. The ship descended. Dust and heat blasted outward as it hovered above the ground, engines screaming as it prepared for landing. The three riders slowed to a halt around him. No words. No movement. Just silence. Waiting. The old man's grip on his weapon tightened. His mind screamed at him to remember. To piece together the fragmented memories clawing at the edges of his consciousness. Commander. The word sent another pulse through his mind. He had heard it before. But not like this. Not from them. Who were they? Who was he? The countdown on his HUD blinked. 39 minutes. And then the ship's hatch opened. A lone figure stepped forward, moving with the ease of someone completely in control. The silhouette was tall, armored, carrying a presence that filled the air with something heavy, something undeniable. The helmeted figure stopped a few feet away. Then, in a voice distorted by the helmet's modulator, "You left us." The old man's heart pounded. No. He had escaped. Hadn't he? The figure took another step forward, tilting their head slightly as if studying him. "You don't remember, do you?" Silence stretched between them. Then the figure extended something forward. A small, circular object. He knew what it was before he even saw it clearly. A memory drive. His fingers twitched. He knew, deep down, that if he took it, if he activated it, everything would change. His past would no longer be a mystery. But was that what they wanted? Did they want him to remember? Or did they want him to forget again? The countdown on his HUD flashed again. 34 minutes. Not much time left. And for the first time in decades, he was faced with a choice. He could take the memory drive, unlock the past, and face whatever truth had been buried for so long. Or, he could run. The memory drive gleamed in the armored figure's hand, its smooth surface catching the faint glow of the ship's lights. It was small, insignificant in appearance, but the weight of it pressed down on the old man's chest like a collapsing star. His fingers twitched at his side. He didn't need to touch it to know what it was. It held everything. Everything he had buried. Everything they had erased. The wind howled between them, kicking up loose dust. The three riders remained silent, their presence a reminder that the moment he reached for that drive, he was choosing a side. The armored figure tilted their head slightly. A small, deliberate movement. "You don't have much time." The old man's jaw clenched. "Neither do you." The thought came unbidden, instinctive. It wasn't just a realization, it was a memory. A feeling of something he had once said to someone, somewhere, long ago. His pulse quickened. The countdown on his HUD ticked away. 28 minutes. Too long to do nothing. Not long enough to think. His muscles tensed as his body made the decision for him. His hand shot forward, not for the memory drive, but for the armored figure's wrist. The moment he made contact, it was like flipping a switch. A spark of something electric shot through him, a pulse of energy that wasn't just physical. A flash of light exploded in his mind, a battlefield. Smoke. Fire. A name. Not his. Theirs. The old man staggered back, releasing his grip. His breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. The armored figure didn't react. Didn't move. "It's coming back, isn't it?" The voice was calm, almost expectant. The old man's head throbbed. His fingers curled into fists. He wasn't sure if he wanted to remember. Not yet. His mind scrambled for options. The countdown loomed. 26 minutes. He still didn't know what happened when it reached zero, but he was starting to understand something. It wasn't just his countdown. It was theirs, too. Whatever was coming. It wasn't just coming for him. It was coming for all of them. The ship's engines shifted, adjusting its position. The old man's eyes flicked up, instincts roaring to life. That wasn't idle movement. It was preparing for something. The three riders tensed slightly. Barely noticeable, but enough to confirm what he already suspected. Something was about to go wrong. His eyes darted back to the memory drive still being offered to him. The armored figure hadn't withdrawn it. Hadn't forced him to take it. This was still his choice. The choice he had run from for 40 years. His throat felt dry. Why now? His own voice sounded foreign to him. The armored figure tilted their head again. Because you locked yourself away. The answer sent a fresh jolt through him. Locked himself away. Not hid. Locked. A memory surfaced, a flash of hands working quickly, a sequence of numbers punched into a panel, doors slamming shut as voices screamed on the other side. His heartbeat thundered. He hadn't escaped. He had sealed something away. And now, it was coming back. The wind picked up again, but this time, there was something wrong with it. A deep, unnatural hum vibrated through the ground, rattling his bones. The armored figure turned sharply, their visor tilting toward the sky. So did the riders. The old man didn't need to follow their gaze to know. The countdown wasn't for them. It was for whatever was coming. His fingers closed around the memory drive before he even realized what he was doing. The moment his skin made contact, his vision shattered. It wasn't like remembering. It was like falling. A free fall through time, through himself, through everything. He saw himself. Younger. Stronger. Dressed in the same suit he had just put on but not the same man. His eyes, hard. Calculated. Deadly. A mission. A war. A weapon. Him. He had been the weapon. He had been created, not born. A soldier designed for something far beyond human understanding. Not to fight wars. Not to protect nations. But to stop something else. Something older. Something coming now. He saw his own hands, decades younger, typing on a control panel, sealing a facility, no, a prison, shut from the inside. He saw the doors close. He heard the voices. Begging. Screaming. Not in pain. In fear. Not of him. Of what was inside. He had sealed something away. Not just an enemy. Something beyond enemies. Something the universe itself feared. His mind snapped back. The desert. The ship. The storm forming overhead. The countdown, 15 minutes. The armored figure took a step back as the old man staggered, his chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. He knew what was coming now. It wasn't just after him. It was after all of them. His gaze snapped to the riders. You didn't come for me. His voice was raw, shaking. You came to make sure I was ready. None of them answered. They didn't need to. The memory drive had shown him enough. He exhaled sharply, steadying himself. How long have we had? The armored figure hesitated for the first time. Then, quietly, 40 years. His stomach turned. They had known. They had always known. They had been waiting for this moment. For the past to break free. For the thing he had locked away to wake up. The countdown on his HUD blinked. 12 minutes. The sky darkened. Not clouds. Not ships. Something worse. He squared his shoulders, his breath steadying. He wasn't ready. But it didn't matter anymore. It was here. The past had come back. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. The countdown ticked down. 12 minutes. The sky shifted, the air thickening with an energy he had nearly forgotten. The old man's heart pounded against his ribs as the realization settled deep in his bones. This wasn't just a memory returning. This was something breaking free. A storm gathered above, but it wasn't natural. No wind, no rolling clouds, just a dense, pulsing blackness that stretched across the horizon. The world beneath it trembled. The riders didn't move. Neither did the armored figure. They stood, waiting, watching. They had known this would happen. They had known he was the key. His fingers curled around the memory drive, heat pulsing from it like a heartbeat. His heartbeat. The knowledge inside it now part of him, woven back into his consciousness. His past had been erased for a reason. Because he had locked something away. And now, it was waking up. The ship above them adjusted its position, the engines humming louder. The armored figure turned their head slightly, their visor reflecting the unnatural sky. You feel it now, don't you? The old man clenched his jaw. Feel it? It was more than that. It was like something inside him had been waiting for this moment. Like he had been designed for it. Another pulse rippled through the sky, sending a low vibration through the air. 10 minutes. The ground shuddered. Not from the ship. Not from any explosion. From something underneath it all. Buried. Caged. And breaking free. The old man inhaled sharply. It was never about finding me. His voice was steady now, his purpose clear. You were making sure I didn't stop this from happening. The armored figure didn't answer. Didn't have to. He had spent 40 years thinking he was hiding from them. But in reality, they had been guarding the door he had locked shut. His stomach twisted. The countdown wasn't about him. It was about whatever was sealed away. And once the clock hit 0, there would be no stopping it. His hands flexed over the grip of his weapon. He hadn't fought in years. He wasn't sure if he even knew how anymore. But his body remembered. His instincts, his reflexes, the way his breathing slowed instead of quickened when he faced danger. The past had returned. And it was demanding his answer. Another pulse. The riders tensed this time. Even the armored figure seemed different, their stance more rigid. Whatever was beneath them, beneath the world itself, was no longer asleep. His fingers tightened around the weapon. Then, a voice. Not from the riders. Not from the ship. Not from the armored figure. But from everywhere at once. Deep. Hollow. Like an echo stretched across time. You locked the door. His blood ran cold. But you never destroyed the key. A deep crack split through the air. The ground lurched violently, sending dust and rock into the air. The old man staggered, but his body adjusted before his mind could catch up. He had felt this before. Not an earthquake. Not a tremor. Something forcing its way back into reality. The riders finally moved, stepping back. Their helmets turned toward him, waiting. Because this wasn't their fight. It was his. What did I lock away? The words barely left his throat. The sky pulsed again, this time stretching outward, cracks of white light breaking through the darkness like fractured glass. The ground split open at his feet. And then, it spoke again. You already know. A wave of heat and cold at the same time rushed through his body. His knees nearly buckled. His chest tightened as flashes of memories, buried, erased, rewritten, flooded into him all at once. A facility. An experiment. Not to create a weapon. But to contain something that never should have existed. A breach. A battle that was never recorded in history. And him, not stopping it. Not fighting it. But trapping it. The old man's breath came in shallow bursts. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an army. It wasn't even alive in a way that should be possible. It was something else entirely. I was the jailer. The words slipped from his lips before he could process them. And now the prison is breaking. A long, drawn-out silence filled the air. Then, laughter. Not human. Not mechanical. Something wrong, something ancient. Did you think I would wait forever? Another pulse. This one was different. Not just an effect. Not just a warning. But a presence. It wasn't just waking up anymore. It was here. The riders backed away faster, and for the first time, he saw something that shouldn't have been possible. Fear. Not from himself. From them. The ground cracked wider, a blinding light bursting upward. And in the center of it, a shape. No form. No solid mass. Just a shifting void, a distortion of reality itself, twisting, unraveling, bending time and space around it. It was alive. It was intelligent. And it was free. The countdown on his HUD hit 5 minutes. But it didn't matter anymore. The door had already been opened. His past had come back. And now, there was only one way this could end. The armored figure finally spoke again, their voice no longer calm. "Commander, we need to leave." The old man exhaled. For the first time in 40 years, he truly remembered. No. His weapon hummed to life, energy coursing through it, responding to its true wielder. His true purpose had never been to hide. It had been to finish what he started. And this time, he wasn't locking the door. He was stepping through it. The void pulsed before him, shifting, writhing, bending the space around it like a wound in reality itself. It had no shape, no body, yet it was alive, aware. The old man could feel it watching him, though it had no eyes. "You locked me away." The voice wasn't a sound, not really. It was inside his head, vibrating through his bones, pressing against his skull like an unbearable weight. He gritted his teeth, fingers tightening around the weapon in his hands. He remembered now. He had been the jailer. He had been the last line of defense between this thing and the rest of existence. And now, the door had been broken open. The riders had backed away, their hands twitching toward their weapons, but they didn't move. They knew. They had always known. This wasn't their fight. It was his. The armored figure stood still, visor locked onto the entity that now hovered between them, an unraveling tear in the fabric of time and space. "It was never meant to wake up," the old man murmured under his breath. The laughter returned. Not human. Not machine. Something beyond both. And yet, here we are. The sky twisted violently, the clouds burning away, revealing something far worse beneath them. Not stars. Not darkness. But a reflection of everything that had ever been, a shifting, endless sea of worlds, memories, and time itself unraveling at the edges. A reality breaking apart. The countdown blinked in his HUD. 3 minutes. Not until the entity escaped. No. It had already escaped. This countdown was something else. The old man's heart pounded. "The fail-safe," he whispered. A trigger. Something he had put in place decades ago. A final measure. A way to end all of this, permanently. His mind raced, memories colliding in fragments. The reason why he had erased himself. The reason why he had let himself forget. Because if he had remembered, he never would have had the strength to do what needed to be done. The entity surged forward, the air warping violently around it, the world trembling beneath its presence. "You can't stop me." He didn't hesitate. He fired. A burst of pure energy tore through the air, slicing toward the void like a lightning strike. It hit. For a fraction of a second, the shape shuddered, its form splitting apart, shifting, breaking, then reforming. Stronger. Faster. The laughter grew louder, echoing inside his skull. "You already tried that once, jailer." His stomach twisted. Of course. He hadn't just locked it away. He had tried to kill it before. And failed. He barely had time to move before it struck back. A pulse slammed into him, his body hurling backward, crashing into the dirt with a force that rattled every bone in his body. He gasped for breath, his suit's protective layers barely holding together. His vision blurred. Shapes. Voices. The armored figure stepping forward, drawing their own weapon. The riders scattering, moving into formation. It wouldn't matter. Bullets, energy, weapons, they wouldn't work. They had never worked. Because this thing, whatever it was, wasn't something that could be killed. The ground cracked apart, splitting like shattered glass. The fail-safe. It was already activating. He had programmed it himself. 2 minutes. He knew what that meant. Not a containment. Not a prison. A reset. A way to erase everything and seal it away permanently, but only at a cost. His own. He clenched his jaw, pushing himself to his feet. He had done this before. He had stood in this same place, faced this thing, and made the same choice. And somehow, 40 years ago, he had walked away instead of finishing it. This time, he wouldn't. Commander. The armored figure's voice broke through the chaos. It's adapting. We need to pull out. He shook his head, gripping the weapon tighter. No. We can regroup. There is no regrouping. He cut them off. His voice was steady now. Resolute. Because he understood. This was always how it was going to end. He wasn't supposed to leave this place again. He was the fail-safe. The entity twisted violently, its form expanding, stretching upward, tendrils of blackness unfurling like jagged claws. It was trying to break free. Trying to reach past this place, past this world, past this reality. You could have left me buried. His fingers hovered over the secondary trigger on his suit. A manual override. A final activation. The pulse that would wipe everything clean, including himself. He exhaled. No fear. No doubt. Just purpose. Not this time. The entity screamed, the sound ripping through time itself as it launched toward him. The armored figure shouted something behind him, but it was too late. The old man pressed the trigger. A light erupted from his suit, spreading outward like a supernova, consuming everything in its path. The entity froze, twisting violently, its tendrils lashing against the air, against reality itself, trying to escape. But this time, there was no escape. He felt himself disintegrating, his body breaking apart, the very fabric of his existence fading into the light. And in the last fraction of a second, he remembered everything. His name. His purpose. His final words before he had erased himself the first time. If this day ever comes, I won't run again. Then, nothing. Silence. No sky. No land. No time. Just an endless, infinite void. And then, a breath. His breath. He still existed. Somehow. But the world was gone. The void was gone. The failsafe had worked. Or at least, it should have. A voice broke through the emptiness. You never understood, did you? His eyes snapped open. And the void stared back at him. The reset had worked. But he hadn't stopped it. He had become part of it. And now, it wasn't over. Not even close. The absence of space, of time, of anything familiar. No stars. No sky. No land beneath his feet. The old man drifted through the void, weightless, disconnected from everything he had ever known. He had triggered the failsafe. The prison should have been erased, the entity sealed forever. And yet, he was still here. A voice slithered through the emptiness. Did you think it would be that easy? A pulse rippled through the blackness, warping, twisting, stretching into something just beyond recognition. The entity. The thing he had locked away. But it wasn't the same anymore. Neither was he. His fingers curled, expecting to feel the weight of his weapon. Nothing. His body, gone. Not erased. Not destroyed. Changed. He inhaled. He still had breath. But how? He had seen himself disintegrate, felt his atoms scatter into the blinding pulse of the failsafe. And yet, he remained. You're beginning to understand, aren't you? The voice wasn't distant anymore. It was inside him, around him, woven into his very essence. He gritted his teeth. I ended this. Laughter. Not a sound, not a vibration, something deeper, more fundamental. You tried. A shape coalesced before him, shifting, flickering between forms. Shadows stretched and folded, breaking apart into infinite reflections of himself, his past, his present, his possible futures. He had fought wars. He had sealed this entity away. He had erased himself to protect the world from what he knew. And yet, none of it mattered. Not anymore. Because the thing he had tried to lock away wasn't just some ancient enemy. It was something far worse. Something that had always existed, waiting, watching, wearing down reality itself. You weren't my captor, the voice whispered. The void trembled. You were my reflection. The realization slammed into him with the force of a collapsing universe. He had been fighting himself. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Literally. The entity wasn't some external enemy. It was him, or rather, the part of him that had been ripped away, locked in the prison, sealed from existence. A past life. A decision. A sacrifice gone wrong. What am I? The void shuddered again, and suddenly, he felt something new. Memories that weren't his, yet they belonged to him. A time before the war. Before the fail-safe. Before the prison. Not just a soldier. Not just a weapon. He had been something more. A creator. A warden. Not of life, but of balance. The old man's breathing grew slow. Steady. It all made sense now. Why the entity had been waiting. Why it hadn't tried to kill him. Why it had let him remember. You locked me away to protect them, the voice whispered. He exhaled. I locked you away to protect everything. The void pulsed. Shapes twisted. And for the first time, he saw it, truly saw it. Not a monster. Not an enemy. But something he had chosen to become. And now, he had returned to finish what he started. But the question remained. Was that a good thing? The return the void began to break apart, cracks of light splitting through the endless darkness. Time itself reassembled. Reality pulled him back in. The old man gasped as he felt something solid beneath his feet. The air was thick, heavy, real. He was somewhere again. But where? His vision adjusted, the shapes around him slowly coming into focus. A room. Metallic walls, dim emergency lights flickering along the edges. Not the wasteland. Not the desert. A ship. No, the ship. The one that had been watching him before the failsafe triggered. He staggered forward. His body was whole again. His hands, his legs, everything was intact. He wasn't dead. He wasn't erased. He had returned. He's awake. A voice. Not the entity. Human. He turned sharply. The armored figure stood in the doorway, helmet off. Their face was sharp, lined with scars. Eyes filled with relief, and fear. How long? The old man's voice was rough, unused. The armored figure hesitated. 3 days. His stomach turned. What happened? A flicker of something passed over their face. You tell me. The old man closed his eyes. Flashes of the void. The entity. Himself. Something changed in him during those last moments. Not death. Not destruction. Something merged. He wasn't just himself anymore. And that was the real reason they were afraid. He opened his eyes. The failsafe didn't erase it. His voice was quiet. The armored figure's jaw tensed. No. The air in the room felt too small now, like it couldn't hold him. It's still inside me, isn't it? Silence. Then, a nod. We don't know what that means yet. The old man exhaled slowly. Neither did he. But one thing was clear. The past wasn't gone. The war wasn't over. And this time, he wasn't just the jailer. He was the door itself. And if he couldn't control what was inside him now, the next time it escaped, there wouldn't be a second chance. The room felt too small. The air too thick. The walls of the ship too close. The old man stood motionless, his fingers tightening and loosening at his sides as if he were testing whether he still had control of himself. He could feel something shifting inside him, something new. No, not new. Something that had always been there, hidden beneath decades of forgotten memories. Something he had locked away when he had sealed the entity in its prison. But now, he had become the prison itself. His breath came slow, controlled. How bad is it? His voice was calm, but the question carried weight. The armored figure hesitated. Their stance was firm, but there was something different in their posture now, something wary. Like they weren't sure if he was still human. We're still running tests, they said finally. Physically, you seem fine. And mentally? Silence. A long one. The answer wasn't certain, which meant it wasn't good. The old man closed his eyes. He already knew. He had felt it the moment he woke up. A shift in his thoughts, in his perception of reality itself. Everything felt clearer, sharper, wider, as if his mind was stretching beyond the limits of time and space. As if he was seeing everything at once. He opened his eyes again. The armored figure was still watching him, their gaze unreadable. Tell me what really happened after the failsafe. Another hesitation. Then, we thought you were dead. A simple statement. No emotion. The blast erased everything. The entity, the anomaly, the entire sector was gone. But I wasn't, the old man said quietly. No, the armored figure admitted. You came back. The old man exhaled. He had died. Or something worse. But now, he had returned, and something had returned with him. He could feel it coiling in his chest, watching, waiting for something he didn't understand yet. You're different, the armored figure said, stepping forward cautiously. The old man's fingers twitched. How? The armored figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, they reached behind their back, pulling out a small device, a scanner, its screen glowing faint blue. Your readings aren't normal. The old man raised an eyebrow. Define normal. The armored figure shifted uncomfortably. Your neurological activity is off the charts. Your energy signature doesn't match any known human baseline. And your body. They stopped. The old man waited. Your body is generating a field that we can't measure. Like you're partially existing in multiple states at once. His heart slowed. Partially existing. A bridge. Between what was human, and what wasn't anymore. He inhaled sharply, willing himself to focus. Contain it. Control it. And the others, he asked. The armored figure shook their head. No one else survived. Only you. The old man stared at the floor. He had been the only one left standing after the failsafe. Because the failsafe hadn't erased the entity. It had merged them. A slow, creeping dread curled in his gut. Not fear for himself. Fear for what might happen next. "We need to run more tests," the armored figure said, stepping back, still keeping their distance. He could hear it in their voice. They weren't trying to understand him. They were trying to contain him. A sharp pulse throbbed at the base of his skull. A whisper slithered through his mind. "They know." He froze. That voice, not his. Not human. It was still inside him. The entity hadn't been destroyed. It had been waiting. For him. His breath came faster now, a cold sweat breaking along his spine. "Commander?" The armored figure tensed, one hand resting near their weapon. They saw it too. The change. The shift. They could sense something was wrong. The old man forced himself to breathe, pushing back against the thing inside him, drowning out the whispers, the crawling sensation in his mind. "I need to be alone," he said, voice even. The armored figure hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be watching." They left, the heavy door sealing shut behind them. The moment he was alone, the whispers grew stronger. "You cannot fight what you've become." The old man clenched his jaw. "I will control it." "You think you were the warden." The whisper turned into a slow, eerie laugh. "You were the key all along." His hands trembled. He wasn't the jailer. He wasn't the failsafe. He had been the prison itself. And now, that prison had broken. A sharp, searing pain tore through his chest, sending him to his knees. His vision blurred. The walls of reality bent and stretched, warping around him. He felt himself slipping, his mind splitting apart like fragmented glass. "Stop fighting." He gasped, gripping the cold metal floor, forcing himself to stay grounded. "I am not you. You always were." A pulse of darkness surged through his vision, and for a brief, terrible moment, he saw the end of everything. Not just the world. Not just the universe. Existence itself unraveling. Because he was never meant to return. He had broken the natural order when he came back. And now, something had followed him through. "You feel it, don't you?" His breath came fast, his heart pounding. "You don't belong here anymore." The room shifted. The ship groaned, the lights flickering violently. Reality itself strained against his presence. "Let go." His vision pulsed black. Then white. Then, nothing. When he opened his eyes, he was somewhere else. Not on the ship. Not in space. Not in any reality he had ever known. Just emptiness. No time. No stars. Just a single voice, whispering from every direction at once. "Now you understand." The old man exhaled. His fingers curled into fists. He knew what he had to do now. Not fight it. Not erase it. But become something else entirely. Because the only way to stop what was coming, was to become the thing that no one else could. The balance. The bridge.